They buried Patricia on a Tuesday under a sky so clean it felt disrespectful. By Friday, a woman who smelled like dry toner and cold ambition told me my badge wouldn't work anymore. The dirt under my fingernails from the graveside hadn't even cleared, but the company made sure my inbox did. Grief had taken my wife. Restructuring took my paycheck. The bills stayed. Name's Thomas Sullivan. Tom to anyone who's ever trusted me to hold a line under fire or in a boardroom. 54. 12 years at Helios Defense Solutions. I once thought a dozen years meant something in a business where memory supposedly equals money. Turns out it meant I knew where the bodies were buried on contracts, and that I was expensive in Q3. The morning they cut me loose, the conference room glass looked like aquarium walls. Inside, 2 fish watched me drown. Claire Patterson from Strategy. Pen clicking like a metronome for mercy I wouldn't get, and Paul from HR. 1 tab open to my file, 1 eye hunting the nearest exit. Claire read lines I could have recited for her. Market headwinds, organizational realignment, appreciation for my contributions. She never once said my wife's name. She never once said mine without the folder to remind her. I boxed my life in silence. Framed photos with tape still on the corners. A coffee mug my daughters found hilarious. A coin I carried from my Ranger days. My desk looked smaller. People suddenly became fascinated with spreadsheets that were blank a minute earlier. No one met my eyes because the human heart is primitive, and losing a job is contagious. I held it together through the elevator, through the lobby, through the false cheer of the revolving door. In the parking lot, the cold rage arrived. Not the kind that burns hot and reckless, no, this one set like concrete, poured slow and permanent. I sat behind the wheel and stared at the bruised blue vein on my wrist pulsing against the steering column, counting it down like a timer on a charge. Back home, the garage greeted me with the smell of oil, old pine, and a promise I'd been slow to keep. The '78 Chevy sat on jack stands, engine block on the stand like a heart waiting for its chest. Patricia had insisted on the project during chemo. "You need to put something back together with your hands," she'd said, smiling in that tired, determined way nurses invent to keep the room alive. The sockets were still laid out by size. The manual still open to a dog-eared page. I picked up a 9/16 and didn't turn a single bolt. Instead, I placed my phone on the workbench and hit play on the last voicemail I couldn't delete. "Hey you," Patricia's voice came bright and stubborn. The way she always made hard things sound straightforward. "If you're listening to this, you're either up too late or thinking too hard. Either way, breathe. Fix what you can with a wrench and the rest with your spine. Love you. See you in the morning." There are sentences that stitch a man's chest closed when everything else wants to split. That one did. I pressed the phone face down and stared at the grain of the wood until it stopped moving. It wasn't like I didn't know the math. The hospital statements came in pale envelopes with serious fonts. The total was a figure that felt like a dare, 320,000, and change that mocked you for counting. Insurance had done what insurance does, paid enough to appear generous, not enough to save you. The girls were shouldering loans because that's what kids do when a parent keeps a brave face too long. Sarah had a half-built rocket in her head and a capstone presentation on the calendar. Emily logged volunteer hours at a clinic, as if watching her mother fight hadn't been apprenticeship enough. They both swore they were fine. They both lied in the way children lie to protect a parent. I ran my hand along the Chevy's fender, over primer that waited for paint like something new. In the corner sat an old wooden box from my father-in-law. Inside, cushioned in felt, lay his pocket watch, nickel case, hairline scratch at 12. I thumbed it open. It still kept time, still ticked like a small brave heart. I set it on the bench. I told myself out loud that the company had already taken enough minutes from this family. They wouldn't take more. I tried to sleep. I didn't. At 3 in the morning, the house breathed around me like it had a memory. The hallway knew my wife's steps, and it knew they'd stopped. The kitchen kept her habit. Mug on the second shelf, tea in the tin behind the sugar. The living room still held a throw blanket she never liked but used anyway. The quiet felt like pressure at depth. When the sun finally smeared gray across the blinds, I pulled the fireproof safe from the closet and set it on the rug. The combination dialed in from muscle memory. Inside, birth certificates in plastic sleeves, our mortgage paperwork, a folder labeled Helios, Offer and Agreement. I brought the folder to the table like it might bolt. My hands went calm in the way they do when the stakes get real. Contracts are funny things. They pretend to be English but prefer Latin. They say what they mean, then hide what they want to say in footnotes that only matter in rooms with closed doors. I read every line anyway. At page 6, under termination and consideration, I found a paragraph I remembered fighting for back when I couldn't possibly imagine I'd need it. 12% of the company's net quarterly profit if terminated without cause, in lieu of bonus and severance. 12%. Not a departmental pool, not a discretionary number with knobs to twist net profit, the whole pie. I read it twice, then a third time because hope is a dangerous drug and I try not to use it without supervision. 12% matters only if the quarter does. And Q3 was the quarter that counted. The big contract, codename Peregrine on my version of the paperwork, would land its first milestone recognition. I chased it for 10 months with a blend of patience and old-world favors. The margins were proper defense industry clean. Even conservative models said the number would be strong, and the whisper in the halls had been 11 to 12 million on the bottom line. I pulled a legal pad from the drawer and did the arithmetic with a pen that felt heavier with each zero. If you've ever watched a figure transform from hypothetical to mission objective, you know the feeling that hits, focus, then a quickening you have to master before it makes mistakes on your behalf. I set the pad down. The kitchen clock clicked. Somewhere outside, a dog barked like a metronome for the heartbeat in my throat. I picked up my phone and scrolled through messages until I found one I hadn't wanted to see. A forecast attachment I'd been CC'd on by mistake 6 weeks earlier. Nothing illegal about remembering what a number looked like. 11:05. The math held. The watch on the bench ticked. Here's the strangest part. It didn't feel like revenge yet. Felt like gravity. You draft a clause for rainy days. The storm arrives. You test the backup generator, the power goes out. You draw a line in ink. Someone steps over it in heels and calls it progress. I wasn't interested in firebombing anything. I was interested in terms kept and debts settled and my daughters never once seeing me flinch when a bill came due. I poured coffee I didn't want and let it go cold while I made a list. Pull together client praise emails. Locate performance awards with dates. Find the signed addendum where legal acknowledged the retention clause when Peregrine preliminaries started. Then, under that, 2 names, Jim O'Brien, Old Jag, did more justice in sand-colored rooms than most corporate lawyers do in glass ones. And Danny Morrison, Ranger brother who'd stayed on the inside at Helios, a good man with admin permissions and a family he deserved to protect. I stared at the 2 names until the line between them sharpened into a road. I picked up the phone and tapped Danny's contact, thumb hovering for a beat over the green call button. Patricia's voicemail still sat open in the recents, 1 swipe away. I pressed play just once more. Fix what you can with a wrench and the rest with your spine. I ended the message, drew a breath that filled every inch of my ribs, and tapped the call through. The line rang. Once, twice, 3 times. A click. Then Danny's voice, low and cautious. You good? I looked at the pocket watch ticking beside the cold coffee, at the folder that could change our quarter and my life, and I said the truth. Meet me tonight. No texts. O'Malley's at 7. I think they thought I wouldn't read the fine print. On the other end, a silence. Then, copy that. I put the phone down, slid the contract back into the folder, and tucked the folder under my arm like it was a birth certificate for our next morning. Outside, the day had the washed-out color of decisions. Inside the garage, the Chevy waited, patient as always, for me to remember how to put something broken back together. I wiped my hands on a rag I didn't need and killed the light. If the company wanted to call this restructuring, I'd give them the structure and the steel to hold it. O'Malley's bar still smelled like it had back in the 90s. Cheap wood polish, fries, and the kind of hope you only find in places where men drink to remember being 25. The jukebox wheezed out something half country, half heartbreak, and I spotted Danny in the back booth under a flickering light. Same eyes as in Iraq, calm, alert, the kind that knew when to keep your back to the wall. He didn't bother with small talk. You look like hell, he said. Appreciate the consistency, I replied, sliding into the booth. You still got access to the internal servers? Danny took a long sip of his beer before answering. Officially, no. Unofficially, I've been the only one maintaining those servers since 2017. Claire never changed my admin rights. He leaned forward, voice dropping. They told the office you left voluntarily. Word is you wanted to pursue consulting opportunities. Claire even took your old office. My jaw tightened. Voluntarily, huh? I must have missed the part where I volunteered to lose my mortgage. Danny's face hardened. She's bragging about it, Tom. Keeps telling the execs she cut the company lean for Q3 bonuses. Said, and I quote, trimming fat isn't personal, it's profitable. You were one of the names she used. That phrase, fat isn't personal, hit like a shot fired at close range. Patricia's voice echoed in the back of my head. Fix what you can with your spine. Who else did she cut? I asked. 2 project managers, 1 HR coordinator, and Barb Freeman from finance. I froze. Barb? She's been there, 20 years? 22, he said quietly. She started when the company logo was still red and blue. They blindsided her the same week as you. No warning. No severance. She was crying in the parking garage, Tom. Said she found something she shouldn't have right before they called her in. I leaned in. Something like what? Danny scanned the bar. No one close enough to overhear. Revenue timing. Claire told accounting to move Peregrine's projected income from Q4 to Q3. It made the quarter look stronger, boosted the exec bonus pool. Barb raised a flag. Next thing she knew, her badge stopped working. It was all fitting too neatly. You can prove any of this? Danny sighed. If I can pull copies of the internal projections and the timestamp logs, yeah. But I have to be careful. IT security's paranoid after that phishing mess last year. One wrong move and I'm the next headline. I don't need you to be a hero, I said. Just careful. He nodded, then slid his phone across the table. Screen dimmed to a locked folder labeled Exec Shared. Still have access. They never revoked it. I can download the files to an encrypted drive offsite, but you'll need to give me a few days. I'll send them through Proton like old times. I smiled for the first time in a while. Still paranoid, I see. Still alive too, he said, clinking his beer bottle against mine. When I got home that night, I didn't turn on the lights. Just sat in the garage with the Chevy and the hum of the refrigerator in the background. There's a rhythm to strategy that feels like war prep. The silence before you commit, the check of supplies, the mental rehearsal of all the ways it could go wrong. On the workbench, the pocket watch ticked. I grabbed a notepad and started listing steps like a mission brief. Confirm contract clause authenticity. Legal. Secure documentation proving without cause. Gather evidence of falsified performance records. Identify motive, bonus pool manipulation. Neutralize corporate spin before they rewrite the story. By the time I reached step 5, the bourbon bottle was half empty. I didn't drink to forget. I drank to focus. But focus doesn't drown ghosts, it amplifies them. Patricia's laugh replayed in my head. The way she'd tap my shoulder and say, "You're not built to stay down, soldier." Saturday morning, I called Jim O'Brien. The phone rang once. "Sullivan," he said, voice like gravel. "Danny told me you'd be calling. I need someone who knows both sides of the battlefield, military and corporate." "Then you called the right bastard," Jim said. "Bring everything. Tomorrow. My office, 10 a.m. His office was the opposite of Apex's sterile glass maze. Wood-paneled walls, framed commendations, the smell of black coffee and permanent marker. Jim was late 50s, gray crew cut, posture of a man who didn't slouch even in his sleep. I handed him the folder. He read quietly for 5 minutes, flipping pages like he was skinning truth off the paper. Then he stopped at section 12C, tapping the paragraph with a blunt finger. "This clause," he said, "is gold-plated. 12% of quarterly net profit if terminated without cause. I've seen tighter language in marriage vows. So what's the catch? The catch, Jim said, is that they'll invent cause. Expect doctored performance reviews, retroactive warnings, maybe even an HR memo you've never seen. They'll try to turn this from a clean termination into a disciplinary one. I rubbed my temples. Figures. Which is why, Jim continued, we go proactive. Collect every compliment email, every project commendation, every proof you were their golden boy until it suited them not to be. You make it impossible for them to claim negligence. Got it. And if I can prove this wasn't just me, that they did it to others before the quarter closed. He smiled thinly. Then it's no longer breach of contract, it's fraud. We're talking SEC-level consequences. That's leverage, Tom. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than fatigue. Not hope, not revenge, momentum. That night, I met Danny again, this time more covertly. He parked 2 blocks away, walked the rest. His face was tight, eyes scanning for tails like we were back in Ramadi. He handed me a thumb drive. Encrypted, triple layer. 3 files, your performance plan, your written warning, and your final review. Check the creation dates. I went inside, booted my laptop, and opened the metadata. My pulse slowed, then sharpened. Created October 8th. I was fired October 4th. Each document, dated differently, created within a 40-minute span. They'd forged the entire paper trail. I called Jim immediately. They faked the documents. I've got proof. Good, he said, voice steady. Send them now. This just turned from a contract dispute into a live grenade. By midnight, I had forwarded everything. Jim replied with 3 words. Game. On Monday. I leaned back in my chair, the glow of the screen reflecting off the old photos on the wall. Patricia in scrubs, Sarah in her NASA sweatshirt, Emily in her white coat shadowing her first doctor. The line was clear now. They thought they'd cut the fat. They were about to learn the difference between trimming and amputation. Outside, rain started to fall soft, steady, like applause from ghosts. I poured 1 last bourbon, set the glass beside Patricia's photo, and whispered, "We're fixing it, love," with a wrench and a spine. Then I closed the laptop, shut off the light, and waited for morning. Monday morning came gray and wet, the kind of rain that seemed to clean nothing, just rearrange the dirt. I parked outside Jim O'Brien's office, a narrow brick building wedged between a pawn shop and a bail bondsman, and sat for a moment, steadying my breath. Inside my jacket pocket, the thumb drive pressed against my ribs like a heartbeat I could control. Jim opened the door himself. "You look like a man ready to pick a fight," he said. "Only if I win it," I replied. He grinned, tossed a folder onto his desk, and motioned for me to sit. "I've been up since 5. Went through everything you sent. Those files." He tapped the folder. "They're textbook forgery. Same author ID, same machine, all created after your termination. We have timestamps, metadata, even digital signatures that were auto-generated when they hit save. That's hard evidence, Tom. It's the kind that doesn't just talk, it shouts." I nodded, but my stomach was tight. "They'll deny it." "Oh, they will," he said. "That's step 1 in the corporate playbook. Deny, delay, drown you in paperwork. But we're not going to give them the time to dig in. We move first." Jim leaned forward, eyes sharp. "We'll draft a formal demand letter citing breach of contract under Section 12C. I'll attach the metadata report and a summary of your termination timeline. But to make this airtight, we need corroboration. We need someone from the inside to confirm the profit numbers." I already knew who. "Barb Freeman," I said. "Finance." Jim's brows lifted. "She'd risk that. She already lost her job. Claire axed her the same week." "Then she's either terrified or furious," Jim said. "Let's find out which." Barb met me 2 days later at a coffee shop near the airport, neutral ground, full of strangers too busy staring at departure boards to notice 2 middle-aged people nursing cold cappuccinos. She looked older than I remembered. Tired, but with that special kind of exhaustion that turns into clarity once the fear burns off. "I should have seen it coming," she said softly. stirring her drink even though it was empty. Claire kept asking for revised forecasts, then told me not to include deferred revenue from Peregrine in Q4. I told her that wasn't standard accounting. She smiled and said, "It's standard when I say it is." 2 days later, security walked me out. I slid a printed sheet across the table, the demand letter draft Jim had prepared. "If you're willing to give a statement, confidential, notarized, it could stop them from pulling this stunt again." Barb looked at me, eyes rimmed red. "You really think that matters, Tom? Companies like that, they bury people like us in NDAs." "Maybe," I said, "but I don't plan on being under theirs." Something flickered in her face. "I saved everything," she whispered. "Emails, spreadsheets, internal memos. I didn't send them to my work email. I used my personal drive. I was scared they'd find them." She reached into her bag and pulled out a small external hard drive, wrapped in a handkerchief like something sacred. "Take it. Just, if this blows back, I've got a mortgage and a kid in community college." I took the drive carefully, like it was explosive ordnance. "No one's finding out it came from you." Her mouth curved into a sad smile. "That's what you said back when we were both naive enough to believe loyalty meant protection." Back in Jim's office, we plugged in the drive. The folder tree loaded like a Christmas miracle. Emails with subject lines like revenue timing adjustments Q3 and executive compensation review. Spreadsheet projections with comments from the CFO. One thread stopped both of us cold. From Claire Patterson to Paul Rodriguez. Subject, workforce optimization pre-bonus. Need to reduce headcount by 4 before Q3 closes. Target high-salary positions. Will coordinate documentation. Ensure performance justifications are in place if challenged. Paul's reply was worse. Understood. Let's finalize before the board review. We can always adjust timestamps if necessary. Jim sat back, blew out a slow breath. Well, that's the smoking gun. Idiots wrote their own confession. He opened a fresh document on his computer, typing fast. "We'll send this by certified mail. Demand full payment of 12% of Q3 profit within 10 business days. Attach evidence of falsified records, witness statements, and the internal emails. I'll also mention the possibility of regulatory involvement. That should get the CEO's attention." He looked up at me. "Once this letter lands on their desk, you'll have leverage. But you need to be ready for what comes next." I frowned. "Which is?" "The settlement offer. They'll lowball you. Try to buy your silence cheap." I thought about Patricia, about the hospital bills stacked like sandbags in the kitchen drawer. "They can try," I said. The letter went out that afternoon. Certified. Signature required. By the time I got home, I could already feel the shift in gravity, like a storm pulling in. The next days crawled. I worked on the Chevy to keep sane, tightening bolts, sanding down primer, painting small pieces one coat at a time. Every task gave shape to the waiting. On day 6, the phone rang. Unknown number. "Mr. Sullivan?" a voice said. "This is Paul Rodriguez from Helios Defense. We'd like to discuss a resolution." "I'll bet you would," I said. "In person," he continued. "Thursday morning, 10 o'clock. Your counsel and our leadership team, including Mr. Whitmore, our CEO." I paused. "You bringing Claire?" "She'll be there," Paul said after a long beat. "Then I'll see you Thursday." When I hung up, the silence in the garage felt electric. The Chevy gleamed under fluorescent light, half-assembled but solid. Patricia's pocket watch ticked on the bench, marking each second like a countdown. For the first time since that Friday in the conference room, I wasn't angry. I was ready. Thursday would be the reckoning. Thursday arrived clear and cold, the kind of morning that forces you to choose between fear and resolve before you've even had coffee. I put on my old navy blue suit, the one Patricia bought me when I got promoted years ago, and tightened a tie I hadn't worn since her funeral. As I adjusted the knot, her voice echoed in my head. "Straighten your shoulders, Tom. You walk like you've already lost." Not today. Jim O'Brien met me in the lobby of Helios Defense headquarters, holding a yellow legal pad and a smirk that said he'd already written the ending. Remember, he murmured as the receptionist led us down the hallway lined with motivational posters and expensive silence. Don't fill the silence. Let them squirm. The conference room was a glass box with chrome edges, cold, reflective, corporate. Claire Patterson sat across the table, tapping her pen on a closed folder. Her blazer was sharper than the last time I saw her, but her confidence had hairline cracks. Paul Rodriguez sat beside her, laptop already open, avoiding eye contact. At the head of the table, the CEO, Richard Whitmore, 60-something, slick gray hair, reputation for civility as armor, waited like a judge who'd already read the verdict. 2 company attorneys flanked him, both in suits too clean for real work. Mr. Sullivan. Whitmore began with a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. Thank you for coming in. Didn't exactly feel optional, I said, taking my seat. Let's start by clarifying, Paul interjected, that this is a conversation, not an admission of wrongdoing on Helios' part. Jim leaned forward. We're fine with that as long as it's a conversation backed by documentation. Shall we? He slid a flash drive across the table. One of the lawyers took it, plugged it into the projector, and the screen behind him lit up. Jim clicked his remote. First exhibit, he said evenly. Performance Improvement Plan dated August 15th. Document properties. Created October 8th, 11:23 a.m. Mr. Sullivan was terminated October 4th. So either Helios Defense invented time travel, or this was created after his firing. The room went still. The air conditioner hummed. Claire's pen stopped clicking. Second document, Jim continued. Written warning, dated September 2nd. Created October 8th, 11:41. Third, final review, dated September 28th. Created October 8th, 11:58. He turned to Whitmore. 3 separate performance documents, all fabricated within 40 minutes. Backdated to justify termination, for cause. That's not just unethical. It's fraudulent. Claire's face had gone pale, the color draining like someone had unplugged her. That's absurd, she blurted. Those files were digitized copies of originals that never existed? Jim cut in, his voice steady. Metadata doesn't lie, Ms. Patterson. Whitmore's gaze slid toward Claire, cold and sharp. Is this true? She stammered. I had HR assist. Paul can confirm. Paul's throat bobbed. I was told the documents were finalized post-termination for internal record-keeping. That's standard procedure. Jim smiled faintly. Interesting, especially when paired with Exhibit 4. Click. New file. Email chain. Subject line. Workforce optimization pre-bonus. From Ms. Patterson to Mr. Rodriguez. Jim read aloud. Quote, need to reduce headcount by 4 before Q3 closes. Target high-salary positions. Ensure performance justifications are in place if challenged. Mr. Rodriguez replied, understood. We can always adjust timestamps if necessary. The silence was surgical. Whitmore's knuckles whitened around his pen. You two put this in writing? Claire opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Jim clicked again. Exhibit 5, sworn statement from former senior financial analyst Barbara Freeman. Fired 4 days after raising concerns about moving Peregrine revenue into Q3 to inflate executive bonuses. She supplied the following spreadsheets. The screen filled with side-by-side profit forecasts. Original versus revised. The revised version had $2.8 million more in Q3, the same amount cut from Q4. Whitmore's jaw tightened. Deferred income manipulation. You realize that's an SEC violation? Jim nodded mildly. Exactly our concern, sir. I sat there in silence, watching the room fracture in slow motion. Claire's mask was gone. Paul looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. The 2 lawyers whispered to each other, eyes darting to Whitmore for instruction. Finally, the CEO spoke. Ms. Patterson, step outside. Sir. Now. She stood, clutching her folder like a life vest, and left. The door closed with a soft click that sounded like a cell door locking. Whitmore turned to Paul. You too. Paul gathered his laptop with trembling hands and followed her out. Now it was just the four of us, me, Jim, Whitmore, and the silence. Whitmore leaned back, studying me. Mr. Sullivan, you're not here to destroy Helios. You're here to be made whole. Depends on your definition of whole, I said. He nodded slowly, then pulled a slim folder from his briefcase. We've reviewed your contract. The clause is valid. 12% of net quarterly profit for a termination without cause. The final audited number for Q3 is $11.5 million. That equals $1.38 million due to you. He slid the folder across the table. Wire transfer within 3 business days of signature. Standard NDA, no admission of wrongdoing. Claire Patterson's employment will be terminated immediately. Jim flipped through the papers, lips tightening. Numbers check out. NDA's standard. You'll understand if my client has conditions. Whitmore raised an eyebrow. Such as? I leaned forward. 2 names. Barbara Freeman, she gets a consulting contract. $250,000, with official acknowledgement clearing her record. And Danny Morrison, he gets the promotion he earned 2 years ago. Senior systems engineer, full pay bump. Whitmore studied me for a long beat. You're protecting your people. I'm reminding you what loyalty looks like, I said. He tapped the folder once, then nodded. Done. Paperwork by end of day. Jim closed the folder, slid it into his briefcase. Then we have an agreement. Whitmore stood and offered his hand. I took it. His grip was firm, cold, deliberate. One more thing, he said as we reached the door. We'd like you to consider coming back. Senior Vice President. Full authority over government contracts. Significant compensation. I met his eyes. I appreciate the offer, but I'm done working for people who need lawyers to teach them ethics. Whitmore exhaled softly, as if he'd expected it. Then good luck, Mr. Sullivan. As Jim and I walked out through the lobby, the receptionist smiled nervously, pretending she didn't know she'd just witnessed a quiet execution. Outside, the sun finally broke through the clouds. Jim clapped my shoulder. You realize you just walked away from a 7-figure salary offer? Yeah, I said, watching the light hit the glass building behind us. But I walked out with something better. What's that? My name still means something. He chuckled. Hell of a currency, that. By Monday, the wire hit my account. $1,380,000, right to the cent. I stared at the screen until the numbers blurred. Then I logged into the hospital billing portal. Patricia Sullivan, balance, $0.00, paid in full. I called Sarah first. Sweetheart, how's the thesis going? Stressful, she said. I was going to call. You got the new tuition bill? Already handled, I said. Dad, what do you mean handled? I mean you and your sister can focus on graduating. That's your job. Let me handle the rest. She went quiet. Dad, how? Your mom always said good things happen to good people, I told her. Sometimes it just takes the right contract clause. 6 months later, I stood in a different office, smaller, cluttered, mine. The plaque on the door reads Sullivan Defense Consulting, veteran-owned and operated. Danny worked 2 desks over, coffee in one hand, a blueprint in the other. Client wants a risk assessment on procurement compliance, he said. I told them we charge extra for teaching ethics. I laughed. Put it on the invoice. Most of the Apex money stayed invested. Some went into something better, the Patricia A. Sullivan Fund for Cancer Research. $100,000 a year, Atlanta Medical Center. They put her name on a plaque in brushed steel letters. Every so often, I drive out there, stand in front of it, and read her name until the world feels balanced again. Then I go home, back to the garage, where the '78 Chevy finally runs like it was meant to. When I turn the key, the engine hums. Steady, alive, and honest. I set Patricia's old pocket watch on the dash. Tick by tick, it reminds me. Some things are built to last if you have the patience to rebuild them. That's not revenge. That's accountability.